set, and go. Ooh, thank you. We're seeing some good ideas pop up. Here's we get to see our creativity. All right, that's our timer, everybody. Thank you so much for all of these amazing ideas. We saw projects to encourage various language, a cultural symposium, faith-based nonprofits, curriculum nights, parent nights, assistance with childcare, free tutoring, family engagement, academics, sit and sit to discuss achievement goals, emails to parents, website inclusion, phone calls to parents, cultural nights, tiered incentives and activities, lots of different family nights before and after school care. So many amazing ideas. Thank you, everyone. Please keep your family engagement idea that you posted right there with you, because we are going to return to this in a few couple slides. Thank you all.
Thank you indeed. There we go. All right. So much like you, we were posed with the same problem. There are a few schools that need some support. They're in a turnaround process, and we came to the table really trying to understand what parent engagement opportunities there are that would help the district, school leaders, educators really work to turn these schools on a better path, right? So our study's objectives, because we started with a study, was to explore the effects of traditional parent engagement behaviors on student outcomes in turnaround schools. In our study, we also wanted to leave enough room to discuss the emancipatory implications of these emerging needs. Research questions that guided this were: what is the relationship between parent engagement and literacy achievement? And what is the relationship between parent engagement and attendance? Attendance is a COVID gift, because with all the changes and testing nuances that occurred in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, we weren't able to have as many scores, and we know testing is non-existent for an entire year. So what researchers have done is that they've been looking at attendance, because it is an education outcome, as a way to talk about performance and needs. So we added that just to fill in the gap for whatever students might not have had scores for us to include in our study. So a little background on what turnaround schools, actually are. Turnaround schools are a part of a school improvement push from the federal level, and it has seen increased funding since No Child Left Behind in the billions, the last figures that I saw. Despite this increased funding, however, we've noted, just as a research and education community, that the achievement gap between the groups of students who were targeted for these fundings and the students who typically do well still remains high. Students from marginalized groups who across several indicators always occur at the bottom of these achievement gaps we've been looking at. They tend to experience reduced access to challenging curriculum, low graduation rates, and then low college acceptance rates. So the school turnaround process aimed to address these things and almost use them as precursing indicators to determine what schools were on track to really suffer from these issues that I just mentioned, and create space for local and state government and representatives to step in the gap and really address these gaps as they are experienced in schools. However, so that's the plan. That's like the bird's eye view. Something that researchers have been talking about more recently is how school turnaround is not decontextualized, right? It's just not about closing a school, moving some students, starting afresh. It tends to occur in local level politics and processes around reorganizing whole communities. So once a school closes, typically families follow, businesses follow, and then you have death of communities. So researchers and educators alike have been raising this notion of turnaround school as an overall equity space, because communities that are typically hurt most by turnaround processes are those that have high rates of Black, brown, and poor people living in them. Black, brown, and poor people, like I said before, are overrepresented in turnaround schools, but also in the neighborhood zone for turnaround schools. And like I said earlier, at the bottom of the achievement gaps that we use to trigger the processes. School closures impact Black and brown and poor students in these schools and their communities. And these decisions are a part of that dynamic I just mentioned. As far as research is concerned, the area is slim. Like I said, it's emergent. We just happened upon that. And as it pertains to parent engagement in this space, it's virtually non-existent. The research that does exist for turnaround schools and parent engagement typically look to see what parent stories are once schools have been scheduled to be closed. So it's no longer a process by which we can improve the school and possibly not close it. The school has a closing date, or after the school has actually closed. And that's how we know that when schools close, communities typically die and people's lives are they're changed. Leave that word alone. Michelle?
Okay, so because turnaround school processes are experienced as displacement gentrification, we needed to prepare ourselves so we could understand the outcomes in a way that was consistent with the reality for Black, brown, and poor people in our study. So we found these concepts that we use to frame our study, these four concepts. So the first one is called post-colonial ontology. This is used to understand the various impacts of education for Black, brown, and poor children, the socio-cultural nuances that explain parent involvement, and the policies and practices that dismantle communities and schools that they inhabit. It functions as a way of shaking up our view of society as a place that has impacted people equally or in the same way. The next one is critical geographies of education. This positions education as an organizing site in the struggle against structural inequalities through advocacy and through community organizing. It also functions to help us connect various inequalities from a larger society to the dynamics in and outside of schools. The next one is called the Nari-Kati framework, which was developed to capture socioeconomic, ideology, and psychosocial patterns of marginalized people who live in and were colonized in these different lands. It functions as a way of organizing some of the trends we see in marginalized communities, the different outcomes and the group norms. It basically captures these things in a way that is more humanizing and more culturally acceptable. The last concept is called critical race quantitative methodology. This makes sure that Black, brown, and poor people aren't harmed by any part of the research process. Um, what this is saying is that the data decisions, the analysis, and even the implementing steps that researchers choose to make in a school, a community, even in the healthcare system, any organization, it will benefit marginalized people and it will not impair them. So these are the concepts that we used.
Hi, everyone. So to apply the concepts and the frameworks that were just discussed by my colleague, we decided to include the following variables into our study: education outcomes, including literacy and attendance, resistance effort, which included surveys related to parent involvement in their child's education, as well as neighborhood metrics using the critical geographies of education framework. We also included measures of material poverty, such as household type and economic stability, as well as ongoing dispossession, which included the percentage of foreign-born population, as well as the zip code where the families lived. And this was done using the NARI-CADI framework. The parents that we included in our survey had to be registering parents with full custody and be able to be in contact with the child, and they had to have a working email address. So we initially sampled over 11,300 parents with students in 32 of the turnaround schools in our district. 1,590 of them completed the survey. However, due to difficulties with COVID, we were only able to tie these parents to 938 students that had the outcome scores we were interested in. So overall, we had a sample of 938 parents of 1,570 students from these 32 turnaround schools, 15 of which were high schools, 12 were middle school, and 5 were combination schools. So our parent demographics, the parents in the sample, the majority were Black or mixed race, non-American. Most were had full-time jobs. They were mostly married mothers with college degrees, and they were between the ages of 35 and 54. In terms of the students, the majority had literacy outcomes that were in the 45th percentile, and they attended school around 70% of the school days. The neighborhood in which these families lived had an average, a mean income of $52,000 and an average family size of 3.4 individuals. About 33% of the population was foreign born, and less than 2% of the families were receiving cash assistance.
All right, thank you. So we performed this analysis called a multi-level modeling analysis. And what it really does is allow us to speak in terms of effect, so really close to causality. And what we found was very interesting. So in terms of how much parent engagement in these turnaround schools impacted literacy, to prepare us to see how it could impact it in the future if we were to help there, we found that none of the ways we conceived of parent engagement explained the differences between how students did. So it didn't cause it, it didn't affect it, there was no relationship there. And we conceived parent engagement in 3 different ways. Parent sense of responsibility, so how responsible the parent thought they personally were for their children's education. And most parents in the sample really took most of the responsibility for their child's education. The instrument asked them whether the teachers were responsible or the child themselves, and most of them scored themselves as personally responsible for their children's education. The next way we talked about it was in terms of perception of participation barriers in schools specifically. So what barriers, made it hard or difficult or impossible, actually was impossible for you to engage at the school and with academics at schools for your children. That didn't explain it either. And the final way we looked at it was in terms of family supportive education. So how much does your family value education and how often is it spoken of in the house? Like you know, are your uncles and aunties, are they encouraging children to do well in school? Like, is it at that home culture value level? That did not influence or explain literacy achievement. And parents in the sample also scored very high in terms of how often they talked about education and made it a priority at home. When we looked at attendance, though, this is where it got interesting. Personal responsibility and family support of education did not affect student attendance. However, the perception of participation barriers did, such that the more barriers parents identified affected how often their students were missing from school. So earlier we mentioned that much of the sample suffered from attendance issues. I think only most of the children on average attended about 68% of the school calendar days. And if turnover schools are really struggling with academics, that's what gets you triggered for this turnaround process, then it stands to reason that the more students are there, the more doses of that education and that instruction they're getting. It looks like parent engagement could possibly impact that in terms of parents' own perception of how they're engaged, how well their engagement is even welcomed at the school. The barriers to stopping that is what explained their children not being in the building. And for those of you who are interested, the children weren't just elementary age. So we're talking about children across the spectrum of school levels, including children who were primarily like middle school and high school. They had some independence in deciding to make it to the school building. So for children who weren't just thoroughly dependent on their parents bringing them to school, the trend remained.
So what are the critical insights of this study? And let's have a discussion. So the perceived participation barriers hinders student attendance. That's what the research is telling us. In the literature, attendance issues are primarily framed as academic disengagement. But what we know is that there are important equity pieces that are missing from the discussion. So we know that further study into the antecedent conditions of turnaround schools and the role of parent engagement plays in student attendance and students' attendance in academic. What is known? Conceptualizing parent engagement models that are specific to turnaround contexts prior to school closure and identifying alternate ways families are engaged, what is known and what is done. So we have that piece. And an emancipatory research and organizing approach to family engagement that restores power to the families that are targeted by this reform. And that is what is known and what is done.
All right, so now we'd like to hear from you. Go ahead, Nadia.
So what did you find surprising about the results? So I encourage you to go back to the chat, throw your responses in, and raise your hand if you'd like to share with us what you found most surprising. Additionally, what surprised you about your own thinking during our presentation? So we'll give you about a minute to jump in the chat, drop your answers in, and let's see what we come up with. Mm-hmm.
Diana's hitting some culturally responsive responsive.
Everything okay? You good?
Ways of understanding that.
Yes, we're good, Roxy. Yes,
Okay.
Diana, there's that choice. All right, so I'm going to start reading some of the responses. We were both just laughing at Diana's response, but it really shows that we're looking at this work in different ways. So most surprising is that students get to have an input in attending school. Who knew? What stood out for some, surprised that parent engagement did not impact literacy. And think about all the work that we have done over the last 20, 30 years, making that linkage. It's a perception of parents' involvement at the school that affects them. Yeah, we all live in our own, we're living in our own perceived state. So I may think I'm doing something that is exceptional, but if it's perceived by my parents or just anyone else, then am I really being effective? Thank you all for these wonderful feedback. And I am going to hand it over to Lori.
Thank you, Nadia. Yes, lots of ahas about that research. Now, if you still have your parent engagement activity that you wrote down in front of you, or if you can go back to the chat to take a look at it, you might have noticed that, yes, our pretend neighborhood that we were using at the beginning was actually the neighborhood that we did the research study in. So that's our average family income, our mostly non-American, Black or mixed race, working full-time. Most are college educated between these ages, and there was our student achievement data. Thinking about what we learned from that research about family engagement, family involvement, how can we change, or would you change your family engagement strategy that you came up with? Or would we change the whole process in how we actually came up with our family engagement strategy? And please add to the chat. I don't know, Nadia and Charisse, if the hand raising is working on this and if they're able to unmute. So I think you have to add to the chat.
So it doesn't look like the hand raising is, well, I haven't seen any hands, but try to unmute if you can. I don't think they can they?
I don't think they can, no.
Tragedy.
But you can chat with us.
We can unmute. Okay, Sasha, would you like to start us? Oh, we can't unmute. That T is important. Okay.
So for those of you who talked about through my culture, let me see. It'd be interesting if we'd share the survey data. Oh, I said that as well. Somebody mentioned Phil Shaver, who's the head of our attendance committee and our attendance group. Yes, definitely Dr. Southwell and the team will be sharing this attendance data with Mr. Shaver. And I know that he would definitely use it to apply to continue to spread the word about attendance as he does. We will also be sharing it with our various committees and teams throughout the community who have a focus on attendance. I'm just reading some of your comments, and thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. And we did have a comment, Dr. Southwell, about visuals and handouts, that there's a lot of good information here. Okay. That they would like visuals for it.
Okay. So what I'm going to do, and I invite all the panelists to do it as well, I'm going to throw my contact information in the chat for you. Please feel free to shoot me an email if you would like some follow-up information, and we will definitely get back with you.
And then we did have a comment that said, create a welcoming environment for families and understanding the culture of the community. That was the family engagement strategy. And that definitely ties with the emancipatory research about understanding. You need to understand the community before you can create strategies to meet their needs. Absolutely. We also had a question, Dr. Southwell, about the barriers. So the question was the perceived barriers. Did any of those families list what those barriers were?
Absolutely. So the scale itself listed different barriers that parents typically talk about limit them getting to the school building. Transportation was one of them. So earlier I saw someone like type in transportation is the thing they work on, and I was like, aha, brilliance, look at that. They did talk about relationship with the educators, so not having a good relationship with teachers. They talked about there was an item that got at their own comfort or into thinking that they had anything they could offer, you know, so almost like a self-efficacy thing. So yeah, they ran the gamut, and I can share the scale with you as well. It's a public scale. If you would shoot me an email, I'll let you know. Um, it will let you know precisely what the items were. Now, I will say when we did early on, after we collected data, we sat down with like a data summary of just what, you know, what is the population talking about? Who are they? How are they moving? And by and large, a lot of parents were very involved at home with their children. They were very much in support of education as a value. They felt more personally responsible than anything else for these activities or for their children's educational outcomes and experiences. And they cited a lot of barriers, but alongside that, they cited an interest in school involvement. The way how the items were, it wasn't written very deficit oriented. So you couldn't look at the results and think, oh, because of this, you're not involved. The questions were what interrupts it? What makes it impossible? But there was still effort being put out to do those things. So I'll definitely share that with you. And I'll also share the larger paper that I'm making more human consumable because it was written for a research audience. I'll definitely share that as well. So you can, you know, spend some time just seeing what precisely went into the study.
And is that something, once you do put that out there and you make it more user friendly, that's something that most likely would be posted on the Family and Community Engagement website, the results of that study?
Absolutely, it can be. One thing that I struggle with as a researcher is moving my studies beyond who asked for it. So we're still working as a team to find a home to put, we do studies like this all the time, to find a place to put them. But definitely, Dr. Cannon, we would put it on the Family Engagement website so it's more accessible.
So what I'm hearing is I need to go ahead and create a whole new section. We can get that done.
Look at that.
So now what do? There is a continued learning opportunity. What the research is showing us and what we know works is that emancipatory research, as well as organizing models, where we really go to the community and present ourselves as an actual partner and want to understand what are the values, what are the needs, what are the strengths of a community. It's a way to bring the community into closer collaboration with our systems of education and ways to ensure that what we do through engagement helps and not harms communities and the people in it. So we have this wonderful opportunity this summer through Seasons of Learning to, our office was given an opportunity to provide well, I was going to call it something else, but provide a workshop series really exploring what does emancipatory organizing and research models look like and what does that mean. So if you are able to go ahead and scan that QR code, it'll take you directly to our Seasons of Learning registration page. And I'll just tell you a little bit about what it is that we're offering and our goals. So we want to ensure that school administrators are receiving an introduction to the emancipatory engagement and practice model. We understand that it is not something that we're all going to learn in a matter of 4 sessions, but let's begin that conversation. Let's begin pulling some of those skills. Oh, I see a question. Is there another way to access it without scanning? I'll see if I can put it on the FACE website or web page. By the end of the course, school administrators as well as teachers will be able to create their own engagement plan that embodies.
Sorry, ladies, we have about 4 more minutes. I just want to give you a quick warning. I didn't know when to stop, but it's about 4 minutes. Then we'll have other people joining us.
I'm gonna wrap up in about 30 seconds. So it really helps us. It'll help. By the time you're finished, you will have a plan on what you're going to do next year that really brings your families to the table, whether it's through your classroom or through your entire school. So I encourage you guys to take a look at it. If you're interested, sign up. Space is limited. And as always, feel free to reach out to Face.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry that we weren't able to hear your voices. We're really banking on the dialogue, but we hoped that you found some value in today. We hope that this is just a start, that you'll reach out to us and, we can continually use the findings of this to do some good in these communities and to really use the power we have to impact people's lives to full effect, right? Enjoy the rest of the conference, enjoy your day, and we'll see you around.
Grazie.
Let me share this with everyone. Not even spotlighted, but you know what? I told y'all I am not the tech lady, so I'm not even gonna try. Anyway, what I want to share with you guys is remember this: you all have the app, right? Have the opportunity to actually communicate with each other, and you can connect with our speakers. You can connect and stay connected with Ms. Southwell through the app. You can communicate, Ms. Southwell. You can share your information. I'm saying you can do all of that via the app. I got some people calling me, but y'all have a very